To question if what I'm hearing is true, I trust myself. To decide that what I'm hearing is false, I do the same. Because it's not about if someone is telling me truth or untruth, it's about if I believe what they tell me without question. To believe them, a considerable amount of variables go into that equation. Closeness, friendship, accuracy, implicit bias, tone, analytical prowess, and the presence of that little tingle when something just doesn't sound right. Each assessing variable adds support for the words that we hear or doubt that would make us pause. And most times when we hear someone say something, this equation is just solved instantly. Now that the amount of information that we're getting online has rapidly increased, our ability to trust or mistrust is becoming an issue. You see, we rapidly process information and instinctively trust or doubt information that's presented to us. The vast majority of these variables that determine why we do trust or untrust are unknown, they're biased, and without reason to anybody but ourselves. But it feeds into the grand equation of if we believe that we are witnessing a truth or a lie. Say a phantom voice speaks to you one night, telling you that the world is going to die. You're alone, the voice echoes down the hall, bewilders your ear, and it repeats to be sure. The world is going to die. And then it's silent. Are you the kind of person that takes everything you hear at face value and the world is suddenly about to die in your mind? Or do you question it? I believe the vast majority of us would question it. And while that sounds logical, and may even be logical, the why is the most fascinating to me. The very instinct to question this phantom voice reveals truth. It shows that we live in a world where untruths can be told, that each of us has previously been exposed to that or acknowledges this possibility. We feel like we need proof because it is atypical. We can also infer that we've heard such outlandish claims before and know that the world has never died before, so distrusting this information has merit. The seed of doubt is planted, with experience primarily being what we draw from when deciding to inherently trust this information or not. If we're so titillated to do so, to further consider the validity of this claim, I think we can also evaluate the source itself. Whose phantom voice is this? Where did it come from? Why is this phantom voice speaking to me at all? Have I heard a phantom voice before? And if I did, does that give it more or less credence to the words that I'm hearing now? We try a dozen things that would eventually determine if we were crazy or if the world was really going to die. And this evaluation would be a matrix of questioning and reflection, and depending on how much we wanted to investigate, it would only end when we have convinced ourselves one way or another. And that's really the entire equation. New information presented, inherent trust or mistrust, an investigation if mistrusted, and a decision. Every single time we are presented with new information, this process happens, and I think it can probably fluctuate in some ways, but those are the bones of processing new information. Depending on if you know the people presenting this information, you may inherently trust more than if they were strangers, or the exact opposite, because your parents simply do not share your beliefs. That inherent trust or mistrust of new information just is fascinating. I think it means so much about who we are, about our culture, about our individual point in time. Because it really has such little to do with reality and everything to do with our own perceptions of reality. Sometimes we hear things that just make sense and we lock those ideas away as fact and move on. We spread them, we share it. We think, this is a relative thing to discuss at a later point. And then other times, the matrix of variables presents doubt and we need to question every part before we isolate what we believe to be true. At one point, our parents were our entire lens into the world and everything they said was pure truth. But something happens along the way, and that changes. A simple belief could make you question everything your parents tell you now, and that does not stop with your parents. The seeds of doubt are evergreen, and choosing to see the beauty in the world is to stop looking when it looks beautiful to you. So what's the point of any of this? Well, it's to show how hard it is to be a part of a system that constantly presents new information that needs to be evaluated. Seemingly daily, something appears on my timeline, newsfeed, friend group, workplaces, telling me a doomed perspective that they heard. And every day I'm reminded that we live in a world where untruths can be told, and we need to evaluate those phantom voices. And doing that is just not an easy task anymore. The lines between the reporting of a news organization, government agencies, independent researchers, or tweets from people affected by whatever we're discussing have just been permanently blurred on the internet or social media, terms in which I will use interchangeably throughout this video. They are all the phantom voices that I am talking about, and they are all speaking to you through social media. Have a good one. These sources can carry as much weight as you give them. But I promise you, nobody gives them the same amount of weight that you do. To some, news organizations feel like the common sense source. To others, this is the most biased source that you can cite. Many people trying to figure out what to believe and who we should support no longer feel like we have the ability to determine what is true, without an evaluation that would be far too time-consuming for a world of workers, for those that work to survive. Right now, I believe I have a good understanding of what's going on between Palestine and Israel, and my beliefs clash with those that believe they have a good understanding of what's going on between Palestine and Israel. We dive into sources, we fact-check, we cite, but at the end of the day, we're just two people discussing something we learned on the internet, and the internet, presently, is flawed. And not like we're kids and our parents don't understand Wikipedia, but like nation-states and greedy operators have weaponized information and language against the people of the world. There is irreversible damage done to public trust, and that will remain irreversible until we demand change to our digital new world. The internet and the effervescent social layer reporting to it are our lens into the world. It's our consciousness interacting with each other, informing each other, sharing culture, sharing speech, finding truth and understanding. It transcends the agora that Socrates paced through many years ago, and in many ways, part of us exists online now. We are brains on a wire talking to each other like I am talking to you right now, with varying degrees of response time between sender and receiver. This is where part of our lives happen now. This is the social experience that we have evolved to need. The entire internet is social media. But for us to discuss the world that we are experiencing, to Socratic method our way to understanding, to find that sense of connection that our social selves need, we inevitably have to trust the information that we're hearing from each other. And now that we have all been reduced to phantom voices, that has become harder than it ever has been before. There has to be a better defined line in determining truth and untruth. Otherwise, we will fact-check and fact-check our fact-checkers and background-check those fact-checkers, and need watchmen watching our background-checkers and all the way down the understanding of paranoia and asking, who watches the watchmen? Returning trust to the internet is imperative. Otherwise, things will only get worse. Otherwise, only those that spend considerable amounts of time evaluating and those that blindly follow their biased sources will know what is true. And I promise you, both of those will argue their position to you with the exact same vigor. We need our interconnected social platforms to exist for us, not for the advertisers, not for the purity culture they protect, not for the agenda of any one group, but for all people that exist and use this new world. We need people-first practices. We cannot let the very well be poisoned, and for this generation and every following to feel like they have no way to determine what is actually happening in the world. This is about protections of humanity, so that the very foundation of our newfound existence isn't adding to the distrusting nature that we now experience. And this starts with us being censored. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you have an adequate understanding of what censorship is, but simply put, it is the suppression and redaction of information, words, art, concepts, ideas, topics, anything. It can be one party self-censoring, it can be multiple parties censoring each other for a variety of different reasons. It can be blocking videos, it can be demonetizing, banning users, and a plethora of things that reduce the reach of anything online. Censorship is not a new issue. In fact, I'd say for as long as we could speak to each other, we've taken issue with what the other has to say. But the majority of us acknowledge that just because we disagree with someone doesn't mean that they should be silenced. The majority of us also agree that censorship has some valid use cases. In recent years, we've seen an increase in censorship, both valid and malicious, as the world has evolved into an interconnected powerhouse that we know it as. The powers that be are different from the powers that were. And we need to evaluate why censorship makes sense in some cases and other times feels abused, controlling, or just outright bad. The instances of censorship are steadily going up, not by the government, which historically is where censorship goes wrong, but by the platforms we elect to use online that hold incredibly similar power. Long gone are the days that the government told us that we have the freedom of speech and we could go to the well-traversed town square and share our perspectives with the world. You're welcome to do that. Sincerely, you can still do this. But I promise few would be there to listen, and the trust fund that rented the space for ads about everlasting gobstoppers would have much to say about the words that you are using in their rented public space. The world has changed. The way we learn new information, where we spend most of our time is fundamentally different, than it was when our government was forming the rules around public spaces, that still shared news via horseback. And simply put, our laws are not keeping up. To clarify something important here, you've never been able to go into public and share your opinion without consequence. But unless you were actively calling for violence or trying to do something illegal, you were free to speak your point of view into existence without the ruling power trying to stop you. You were free to be wrong, and you were free to get clarity about being wrong. It was left to the people to decide if you had valid things to say, and how pleasantly they wanted to be when telling you that sliced bread was better than unsliced bread. We should want people to share their thoughts on the world, and we should want to be able to criticize those thoughts if we feel that they are ill-informed. But in today's age, we're being censored by a ruling power for things that we should not be censored for. It's no longer our elected government holding us to society-defined laws. It's disagreements about sliced bread leading to removals. It's wealthy perspectives controlling how we exist in this new world. Things like unsavory language or clothing, advertisers strong-arming platforms, us being shadow banned, silent blocked, or outright removed from these digital new worlds are all being done without our voices in the equation at all, which is where censorship goes wrong. But we live in a world where untruths can be told. So let's talk about when censorship is acceptable and how to make it a system that works for us. Like I said before, some degree of censorship is okay. Removing media that exploits children, incites violence, or anything that breaks the laws that we voted on is pretty okay. When the topic of censorship comes into question, when to censor and who is allowed to censor inevitably becomes the entire discussion. If we acknowledge that censorship needs to occur, then the line where censorship needs to be enforced is when the people, when the majority of the society that we wish to enforce this censorship on, decide that something needs to be censored. Right now, it's the things that break our debated and upheld laws. Those are the things that need to be censored. Nothing more, nothing less. That way, if we find something that our majority agrees should be censored, we can talk about it, we can debate it, we can vote on it, and it's not left to a single point of view establishing their narrative about right and wrong. It's the people. It's the current culture. It's our current understanding of right and wrong deciding what is right and wrong. It is the only way that this should be done. And any democracy acknowledges this is how it should operate. In America, it's why we have representatives of geographical locations that should correlate to what the people of those regions believe in. This is why we vote at all. It's our voice in the conversation. And because we do, and they have further conversations about what we want and how we can prosper, we can go into the physical town square and do everything short of breaking the law and be just fine. We acknowledge that you can do something dumb or annoying or even borderline problematic, but if it isn't something that we discussed should be policed, it won't be. And most importantly, it's us discussing it. It's nobody else. It's us deciding when this should happen. If we believe that showing pictures of bread is doing harm, we can vote on this and make it illegal to show pictures of bread for whatever reasons that would be debated publicly, and we could all have access to understand how this decision was made. And if those reasons had validity to the majority of people in the equation, then we would have pictures of bread censored from the public eye. This is why child nudity is not allowed anywhere. The vast majority agrees, our representatives voted, it became law, and we don't see it. It is acceptable censorship, even though it comes at the cost of those outlying voices that believe that it should be allowed. For better or worse, the system has a cost, and it's acknowledging that not all people's opinion will be included in every decision. That cost is important because the world is not made for us, and we will inevitably hold the outweighed opinion at some point in our lifetimes. This is why censorship can feel so bad. And if we censor other people who fall into the minority, we will eventually be censored ourselves. So we must make sure that we are consenting to this whenever we decide our society should censor it all. So the question of when to censor is when the majority of perspectives of any given society believe that something needs to be censored. In other words, we can only safely censor ourselves, and it's the people who need to decide what is or isn't acceptable, even if we fall into the minority and our vote is outvoted. Right now, that system exists as the various national governments that create laws on behalf of our individual societies. Anything censored that isn't breaking our laws does so without acknowledging the people, whose perspectives went into establishing what is or isn't acceptable, whose input needs to be a part of the equation so that it doesn't feel like abuse. The only way to resolve that feeling that the powers that be are these fat cat boogeymen deciding our fates is transparency. Transparency into the decision on why we censor things is maybe the most important thing to making it work. Otherwise, it's just another phantom voice in the world where untruths can be told, where inherent trust is rare, and our town square is no longer under the same protections that we fought for. If we have to censor, then we must have transparency. This is because censorship is dangerous. It's a societal defining topic, and getting it wrong is often easier than getting it right. And that's because censorship has a unique flaw. When we censor things, when we decide what is or isn't allowed to be talked about, posted, or shared by other people, we're substituting our perspectives for theirs, saying that this is bad for reasons that I believe, that my upbringing and my education define as bad, and that can go wrong very quickly. This is why some people believe that freedom of speech dies when you start censoring anything. That's where you'll find free speech absolutism. And I won't be the person to argue with you if you believe in this, but I promise you don't actually want people to be able to do anything that they want in our new town square. The world can be a very dark place, and there is a line that needs to be established as acceptable, and it needs to be established by the people to ensure that all perspectives are included, because ultimately, we're deciding which shouldn't. In the United States, we have transparency into the decisions that make some things okay in public and other things not okay. And it's not perfect. You get one bad cop in the equation and suddenly you feel like you're questioning if you're in 1984. And things like women being topless in public is a great example of how this system fails horribly. Thankfully, the system has checks and balances. So when the majority finally acknowledge that a nipple on a man is no more perverse than a nipple on a woman, we can change the laws. Transparency into what is acceptable allows us to understand where certain norms come from and make challenging those ideas that we disagree with possible at all. We need to know what's being enforced represents the people and have the ability to change them if we believe they do not. The reason censorship has run rampant recently is because of our newfound existence online and the ruling power not giving our new town square the same protections as our previous. This is because the ruling power isn't just the government that we collectively established. The ruling power is whichever authoritative platform that you choose to spend part of your existence on, and it now exists across the globe. They give little insight into their algorithms, decide seemingly randomly what is or isn't allowed to be discussed, and remove people for having opinions that they personally deem unacceptable. These platforms have oversight and honor much of what the government says that they must, but make no mistake, they are the ruling power over this part of you. They are voted into power every time you log on, but do not give the same freedoms that we expect from our own government. We should have transparency into much more than we do, and the reason we don't is because we don't feel entitled to it. We agree to a terms of service when we sign up that no person in a world of workers can be expected to read, and it serves as a private constitution giving us a rundown of what rules that we should be expected to follow in their space. We are given little into why bans occur, why posts are taken down, why certain words are allowed by some and not by others. Transparency falls to the wayside, and it's because it's not required, and it's not being demanded by the people whose voices should be considered when censorship occurs. History taught us that these battles for liberty were already fought, and losing rights is more often than not a slow creep so that it doesn't wake the beast that is you. But times are changing, and if we allow our new Times Square to run without our voices, it will be. These are no longer little websites created in dorm rooms. They are worlds being run that carry as much weight as what happens right outside of your front door. So I think it's time that we start demanding more than we're given. So why is it like this? I mean, I won't pretend to know all the steps from point A to an ever-increasing existence online where our new public doesn't have the same protections or even transparency as our previous. But in short, our new ruling powers act like this because our previous ones told them that they could. This is, after all, their space. They control who enters and are responsible for what happens here. We wanted bar owners to be able to throw out rowdy patrons, and now it continues on a global scale. We acknowledge a legal difference between public and private spaces and give owners of these private spaces the ability to decide what they want to allow, speech and behavior-wise, as long as it's not breaking the law. Not saying that any private space exists outside of the law, but you can remove people from your business for any reason that isn't proven to be discrimination. It's a system that generally works in person. But these platforms have changed. What we do here has changed. Part of us exists here. And even if you wouldn't call yourself chronically online, people 20 years ago would be shocked at the number of phone notifications that you get every single day that keep you interfaced with the rest of the world and what's going on. In 20 years, I can only imagine what the benchmark for chronically online will actually be. The digital new world is a large part of our existence, and tomorrow, even more so. This is the most public space that we have ever had. So why don't we feel entitled to the same protections that we have in person? Well, it's because we sign away our rights for ease of use. We sign a terms of service, and nobody has the ability to exist here without explicitly saying, I will conform to your authority and agree to be removed if you believe I am out of line. Because according to our national governments, this isn't public space at all. They believe we are currently the patrons arguing with the bar owner about the rights that we should have in their space. Legally, we have no right to exist here because these spaces that educate our people, that connect us to each other, that satisfy the social requirements of humanity are so clearly private spaces that should be governed by the wealthiest of our society who can purchase our signed terms of service. The point is that the bar owner throwing out the rowdy patron isn't stopping the person from having a drink. It's removing their ability to exist with the rest of us. I think that needs to be talked about. Imagine being in 10th grade again, and all your friends exist in person for 8 hours and then online for another 16. If you were raised in a family that openly spoke to each other much differently than the societal norm, and you were removed from those social spaces because young you talked the way that you were raised to talk, you've just lost part of the human experience that everyone else is learning or is using to learn how to communicate with each other and become the next generation that defines what is and isn't acceptable. Censoring in these new spaces is dangerous, and we need to make sure it's not done lightly or outright radicalizing people who were raised differently. Because I promise, all of you watching this were raised much differently than those controlling these spaces. We signed a terms of service for a private space, for a website, and then it evolved to define what happens in our society. Surely, we are entitled to something that happens here. Surely, there must be a point where private space is so encompassing that it becomes the public. These platforms are our entire lens into the world. It's how we share culture and speech, information and understanding, and any of us being removed because the wealthy person running it has a different standard of acceptable that isn't transparent or what the majority of society voted on is just wrong. It's a recipe for disaster, and we should want more rights than we have. We should demand more rights than we have. The terms of service of public space needs to be what the people decide, laws that we vote on and have the ability to change if we so desire. And if a private space serves the same purpose as a public one, I think it's time to start recognizing the difference between bar owners and billionaires running the new digital world. It's important to make tangible next steps and not just be the person screaming into the abyss that things need to change. I hope at this point in the video, you believe that you deserve more in this realm that we treat like public space that affects so much more than what happens outside of your doorstep. This part of our lives that is public to all but the national legal systems that support companies growing into oligarchies that undermine democracy. This is a complex problem, and all of this buildup was needed to make my point crystal clear. When Socrates walked and talked about his perspective of the world, the ruling power censored him with a sip of hemlock. If we cannot exist in this new space and share our beliefs with each other openly, we risk our future, acknowledging that our present learned nothing in 2,000 years. Countless internet platforms censor you for a variety of reasons because they are private spaces regardless of their impact. Without the ability to fight back, you can be demonetized, blocked, soft-blocked, ghosted, and anything that advertisers strong-arm against us. Until we demand more transparency into the systems that they use and the reasons behind their censorship, the very foundation that we build this new world on will forever be shaky. We will have no ability to inherently trust information. We will forever believe that our perspectives of the world are just phantom voices. We have no input into what happens here because we have been convinced that this and all that we do belongs to a corporation. Even though we are everything that happens here, we must demand that if censorship exists, it represents the will of the people more than anything else, and ultimately is what makes this place what it is, and not the wealthy that would ban us, remove our posts, reduce our reach, or any number of things to silence us. and that keep us as those phantom voices. We need more rights and transparency in this digital new world if we ever want to be able to trust each other or anything that we see here ever again. This is what the internet has been leading to since it was born, and it's time for us to demand change in a variety of ways. The governance of these new social spaces will either offer the transparency that we want and stop censoring our existence for reasons that only they determine, or we will need national governments to reconsider what it means to be a private space. They must acknowledge a difference between private spaces and private spaces that operate as public ones, so that our existing protections in the town square also extend to this new one. If X has an account for every single living person, is that the line in which we say clearly this is serving the same essence, the same purpose as a public town square? Or will we remain silent as companies become the new countries and we are censored into oblivion for any reason that our new rulers feel is just? Asking for more rights will never be easier than the moment that you realize you deserve them. Don't wait until you need them. Thank you very much. And this is open for discussion. Let's talk more. Let's share perspectives. Let's be the public. You're welcome to engage in the comments. You're welcome to make more videos. Just want to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for watching my videos. Much love, everybody.